Planning a trip to Portugal? Whether you're exploring Lisbon, surfing in Ediceto, or road tripping through the Alentejo, staying connected is essential. I use Airalo every time I travel, even on some surfboat trips, adventures to the Maldives. So when we connected to collaborate, I was really genuinely happy. Airalo's eSIMs give you instant data the moment you land in a foreign country. No queues, no physical SIM cards, just seamless, reliable coverage. Travel smarter, stay connected, download Airalo before your next adventure. Follow this link in the show notes to get connected today. This is Justin West from Podcast Portugal. Today on Podcast Portugal, we're joined by Bradley Schurman, one of the world's leading voices on demographics, longevity, and the future of prosperity. Bradley is the author of The Super Age, Decoding Our Demographic Destiny, and co-creator of the Geography of Prosperity Index, a framework designed to understand why certain cities and regions thrive while others struggle. His work sits at the intersection of economics, demographics, geography, migration, and long-term strategic planning. As Portugal navigates challenges around the aging populations, housing affordability and regional development, and attracting international talent, Bradley's insights offer a fascinating lens through which to view the country's future. Bradley, welcome to Podcast Portugal.
Justin, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Very welcome. And I've been following you closely and reading a lot of stuff that you've been doing, and it's fascinating. I'm fascinated by this stuff.
Oh, thank you.
And, you've spent years studying demographic trends around the world. When you look at Portugal today, what stands out to you most as either a major opportunity or a major challenge indeed?
Well, Portugal is like most of Europe right now in the sense that it has a number of different demographic headwinds coming up against it. The country is aging very fast. You have an incredibly low birth rate. You've been very successful at extending human life, thanks to great social protections and a world-class healthcare system. But there's been challenges, obviously, with the economy to some degree. Young people are moving out of the country. And there is relatively high youth unemployment rate in the nation. At the same time, Portugal is really considered to be a success and a cautionary tale for the story of migration, because it was one of the first countries to actively open its doors to folks through its Golden Visa program. And Americans came in droves, and that's created some tension in cities like Lisbon and Porto, where Americans really flocked during and after the COVID years.
I understand that. Yeah, I think I don't know. I believe the general feeling to the migration of Americans. I think generally everybody's been very welcome. The Portuguese have been very welcome. I think because we share so much commonality in terms of culture. There has been some tension, I would imagine, with which cultures which are just so different than Portuguese and even European. I can see that has been some tension, but I also think that the media has been playing upon it for the various political narratives that are going on.
I fully agree with you on that. I think it's an easy story for the media to hook themselves into. It's also one that does have some foundation, specifically in the cost of living and how home prices are being driven up. Now, that's not just immigration that's driving up the cost of housing. That's also an absolutely booming tourism sector. I was just there a few weeks ago, and I was astonished in Lisbon how many thousands of people were there. And I've been to Lisbon before, and I'd never seen anything quite like it. So there are a number of different pressures, but I always say, folks get very nostalgic about the past. Things were better back then, they often say. But I think for most people who have a good memory, they'll remember, Lisbon was pretty rough not that long ago. And that capital investment has really made the city quite beautiful and easy to live in.
Yeah, I'd agree with that point. It's very difficult, isn't it? You're always going to have people that look at the glass half full, or half empty. And yeah, and I think there is definitely, as you say, as you agree, sort of fanning the flames of discontent is benefits some areas of political parties. And but yeah, I do agree, it's a complex situation. I mean, I myself had some logement local, which is like the rental properties, but in the south. And Airbnb was like a little bit like the Wild West back in those days, and that sort of inspired the government to make certain structural changes, some regulations. The same happened also with Uber and taxis and things like that. So you tend to have these new technologies which make it very egalitarian for people to be business-like and entrepreneurial, and then the government will react and kind of put some conditions or restrictions, and that tends to suppress some of the activity in many ways. But so what are the solutions? Are you a believer in sort of government regulation and big government interference with these types of success stories or businesses or entrepreneurial spirit, or
I
how
think
do we manage it?
I think business and government really should be partners. Um, and what that looks like really depends on the local culture more than what I would offer as a blanket solution. What would work for me here in Washington, D.C. wouldn't necessarily work in Lisbon, Portugal. That being said, there are some fundamentals. Government is really designed, at least in theory, to help people, its citizens, achieve prosperity. And if it's not in the business of doing that, then it's missing the mark. There have been these technologies that have been really revolutionary. And you mentioned two of them, both Uber and Airbnb platforms, effectively, that, quote unquote, democratize both the taxi service, which in our cities, as many people will remember, were incredibly onerous, hard to navigate, not necessarily expensive, but very expensive to become a taxi driver. And most people, if they were renting out their properties, they certainly struggled to find a market because having a single platform just didn't exist. But there's some balance in that too, because we have to remember that, whenever a dollar is spent or euro is spent rather on a platform like Airbnb or Uber, that money, big portion of that money leaves the country, leaves the continent and comes here to the United States. So it's a balancing act. It always is a balancing act, finding a line that is beneficial and not detrimental. So, it's a tightrope act, and that's where government and business need to be partners.
Yeah, I mean, Portugal does have, in many sectors, a sort of reputation for being a little bit administrative heavy, a little bit government heavy. I'm not going to say interference, but it doesn't always come across as the most attractive place for entrepreneurialism. And also, I think you'll actually get to see, and I think this is also possibly a case in the US, that government seems to expand. It seems to get bigger. And in some ways, many people in Portugal, some of the most, well, I'm not going to say easiest, but the most sort of secure job that you can have is a job with the government or with the local cameras or municipalities. And in that respect, as well as sort of social services, they're kind of creating their own voter base, because you're not going to vote your employer out of business.
No, no,
So
certainly
it
not.
just
But
seems to promote this ever growing monster of governmental as an employer.
I think there's this challenge of perception versus reality because, at least here in the United States, government has not grown in lockstep with population. In fact, government is relatively small here now. And
Okay,
of course,
interesting.
we have one of the largest governments, the federal government, in the world. The same is true for state and local governments. Now, we are a low tax country for the most part. And if you're charging low taxes of your citizens, you can only fund so many services. Government can only get so big. So I can't speak for the specifics of the Portuguese government or the municipalities and their size, But I can say for certainty here in the US, our government size has not matched the population growth. So the
Okay.
question is, I think for governments, and I think what we see in government here in particular is this idea of resource scarcity. And when there is resource scarcity, it can sometimes or sometimes really stimulate really great innovation within these government agencies. And we don't often think of government being really innovative, but it can be if given the right tools and the right motivation. So, as you know, I'm in the middle of writing my second book now called The Geography of Prosperity, A New Map of the American Dream. And in this book, we identify the top 250 largest urban areas in the country, and we measure them on five fundamental dimensions that we believe will predict to some degree long term sustainability, long term prosperity. And this tool has really acted as a compass, pointing us in the direction of places that we may have overlooked otherwise, the cities that aren't necessarily making the headlines. And I mention this in the lead up to this example because one of the more innovative cities that I've found so far has been South Bend, Indiana. And for those of you who don't know South Bend, Indiana, it was the home of Studebaker, which was the maker of carriages and then automobiles in the 20th century. And Studebaker had a historic collapse as a manufacturer. And this was a single industry town, South Bend, Indiana. And this place immediately fell into disrepair, starting in the Christmas of 1963, really till about 2015. 2015, new leadership comes in, starts making changes. Now, South Bend, just over a decade later, is really considered a model in governance. They just received $1 million grant from the Bloomberg Philanthropies to help build out their AI call center so they can more actively identify and respond to constituent concerns. So if you need something, oftentimes the AI will be able to predict what you need before you even ask for it. And this really helps streamline services and, in fact, reduces the need of human capital, human labor, to provide them within a government. They're also doing amazing things around permitting. We all have dealt with permitting challenges within our jurisdictions. And rather than have an onerous permitting process, they've started to streamline it. So if you want to build a house in South Bend today, you can go to the city website and choose from I think 6 different options that are already pre-approved plans, and you can start building tomorrow. You'll get a permit
Wow.
immediately. Now, that is what a pro-growth, pro-build, pro-efficiency government looks like. And there are more of those than you'd expect popping up here in the United States.
That's very interesting. I mean, from my own perspective and from the Portuguese angle, that is very nice because we do have a housing shortage, but it seems to be the housing shortage is in the major areas where people want to live,
Right.
coastal areas, the major cities, Porto, Lisbon, Algarve, and actually where I live and where I moved, but simply because of the opportunity, there is small farms and farmhouses all around me which are just empty.
Mhm.
The villages are full of little, lovely little village houses that could be easily renovated, and they're all empty.
A-
And
And
and it
this
seems,
is true everywhere, mind you, Justin. This is everywhere. This is not just in Portugal. It's well documented across Europe. It's happening here in the United States as well. These rural towns have really just taken a beating over the last 50 years or so, and some of them might not be able to turn around.
mm, I mean, is it just people sort of going into the cities for education and for bettering their
Mm.
lives, bettering their opportunities,
Yes, that's
or is it
mostly
just
it.
because there's no jobs
Higher
in this area?
salaries, job opportunities, access to cultural institutions, access to people and nightlife, all of these things that, if you live in a city, you kind of take for granted. But if you don't, you're missing out on what is really possible. Now,
Mm.
I do think that there are certain rural communities that are actually doing quite well, but they tend to be rural communities that are in relative close proximity to major cities. and have taken the time and resources to build strong transportation networks that can get people to and fro. And these are typically publicly funded infrastructure projects. And, people don't always like to give a green light to them because they do cost money. But they certainly offer a lifeline to these communities because, let's be honest, many of these communities are absolutely stunning. And the value of the house that you get is remarkable, certainly set against a world where the housing crisis is omnipresent in just about every country.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like in our area, I'm literally 1 hour, 20-minute drive from Lisbon. So in the city center. So it's in almost what in a London case scenario would be the commuter belt. Um, and our roads into Lisbon are absolutely fantastic from here. You have the A2, which is just a very easy drive. You can put yourself in cruise control and off you go. And what I do find is interesting that we do have a lot of the Portuguese young populace. They go into the city to get educated, or even they go abroad to take their qualifications to earn a little bit more money, because there's limited options here. But we also get a migration and influx of people that are actually moving into the countryside to do some of the more labor-intensive jobs, which don't pay so bad, actually. If you're used to or prepared to work in the sun and labor and picking fruit or whatever, these jobs are available here. Um, but it's an interesting dynamic because we seem to have the local people moving out and then sort of people migrating in. And it really changes the character. We have a lot of villages and towns here which are full of old people who have very much traditional values and traditional ways of doing things, and you can see it in all of the activities going on. And then you'll have a completely new culture that is fulfilling this sort of younger demographic of the town. And is that something that happens in the U.S. as well?
Absolutely. I
Or?
was just going to say this has happened, is happening still in the United States, despite the recent restrictions around immigration. There are very diverse towns in America, and some of them are actually getting hit quite hard by these new immigration restrictions here. But, you'll find entire communities of people from the subcontinent in Texas.
Wow.
And and folks will say, wait, Texas and Indians? That doesn't jive. Well, it doesn't jive because of our idea of what Texas is. But Texas, believe it or not, is one of the most diverse states in the US, and it
Interesting.
has welcomed immigrants despite what, the headlines say. It has welcomed immigrants as long as it's been around. Texas was once part of Mexico. There is an interchange of culture that exists there between those two nations. Houston, Texas was one of the primary receiving cities of the Vietnamese diaspora after the Vietnam War. And then you have all of this tech that has just exploded in Texas. Companies like Dell and Elon Musk's SpaceX, Tesla, that have opened there. And much of the educated talent that is being recruited to fill those roles are coming from India. So it's
Interesting.
really an amazing place to see in person, because what you see on the silver screen or on the little box, it is not reality against what Texas actually is.
Yeah, that's a nice story. That's beautiful. Yeah. I'm quite a proponent of immigration. I think well, I'm an immigrant myself. I'm living in Portugal as an immigrant. So, but I do appreciate that there is such cultural differences in and how do cities and how do we navigate these cultural differences? I mean, it's great to absorb everything, and to create activity and creativity around the different businesses come out from the different ideas brought from all over the world. But what do we say to people? What is the argument that we use to say to people who are concerned about their identity and their culture being affected by immigration?
I mean, I don't think there's a clean answer on this, Justin, because different people have different perspectives on what their culture is. There are communities within the US that are built exclusively on immigrants. New York City is one of them. I'd say the best place to see New York City is underground, hopping on the subway, because you'll hear a dozen different languages, see a dozen different types of dress. Um, it is that maybe not a melting pot in the sense that we like to say, but it certainly is a stew. And it's a stew that's been attracting people since the Dutch settled there in 1624. Now, America's story is immigration, but for places like, well, frankly, anywhere in the Mediterranean, the story has been similar, although maybe a different page from history, maybe one more focused on conquest than anything else. So the attitudes might be different towards people coming in. Um, I can't say for sure how to handle this. We've seen really good examples in places like Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I'm heading in just a few weeks for the last stop of my reporting tour for my book, where they have this whole concept of neighboring in place. And this idea of neighboring is you take care of your neighbors. It's very kind of classic Midwestern ideal. You take care of your neighbors no matter what, no matter where they come from, who they worship, what they're here for. They are yours to take care of, and they will take care of you. Um, this sounds really altruistic, I'm sure, but it seems to work in practice on the ground, with some exceptions, obviously. But for the most part, places like Minneapolis work because they've leaned into it. They've leaned into immigrants being part of their story.
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you. I lived in Saudi Arabia and I grew up there, and I was very impressed by the hospitality there. Like the neighbors would come around, they would bring you food, and I think that is really a superb message to get out there that this is something that you can do as an individual, as a family. You can look to your surrounding area and you can just say hello, ask people, just a small conversation every day, a smile, a hello, or a shake of a hand, and just integrate a little bit with your local community and just to make sure that everybody is okay. Like you say, take care of your neighbor, and you'll see them more as people, as in something, as opposed to us and them or an other. They become part of your community. They become us.
Yeah,
I think that's a really beautiful message.
it's practicing, radical empathy. And in order to really be radically empathetic towards your fellow man, whether they be a newcomer or someone whose family has been within the nation for hundreds of years, this idea of really treating people as human beings is pretty central to like a thriving society. And the first thing I think anyone has to realize is that people who are moving to your nation, coming as immigrants, they are leaving everything behind. And they may have different reasons for doing it. It may be political, it may be religious, it may be purely economic, but the vast majority of them are coming to your place for a better life. They're not coming for a worse life. They're not coming to make trouble. They are coming to better themselves. So, keeping that in mind, I think reframes the idea of what immigrants are. We certainly see in the United States that immigrant populations start businesses at a higher rate than quote unquote native born Americans. So they're highly entrepreneurial. They invest more money on average per capita into their communities, which is really fantastic. And the dollars they spend often stay within the community, which helps really generate prosperity for all the residents, not just the immigrant ones. So I look at there being more upsides than down to immigrants, but it's easy to fall prey to media. It's easy to fall prey to political posturing and pomp. Um, but if people try, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Yeah, this is where the problem is, isn't it? It's when we have the media stirring up anti-immigration, and we send like a wall of aggression, of negativity, and then it's probably very normal for an immigrant, a small minority population, to then have to group together to defend themselves
Yeah.
against this sort of aggression, and then you have this immediately. You have these two sort of boundaries drawn, and you know we don't want to get into ghettos or things like that, but that could be what happened.
Well,
Could be what happens.
I always so in my work I do a lot of foresight. So I look at what the future could be and do scenario planning around that, primarily around demographics, but some other areas of interest too. And you know, I have been racking my brain trying to figure out why we had such an anti-immigration sentiment build here in the United States. And one of the ways I look at foresight is by looking into the past, looking for past examples of when similar events occurred. And oddly enough, and mind you, Justin, this is correlation, not causation, but it's an interesting anecdote. The last time we had this high anti immigrant sentiment was about 100 years ago. And at that time, 100 years ago, we had roughly the same percentage of the country as immigrants as today. So it's almost like we hit a threshold here in the United States, which is like between 13 and 17%, where people are like, wait a second, is this America anymore? Where are the Americans? Like
Mm.
it's all of a sudden feels too diverse for people's tastes. Now, 100 years ago, that was the Germans, the Italians, the Greeks, the
The
Irish.
Irish.
Today, it's the Mexicans, it's the Africans, it's the people from, to some degree, the Middle East that have moved here. So it's
Mm,
different people, same kind of story.
okay.
But it is one that we seem to repeat time and time again. Because even before that, in the 1820s, 1830s, 100 years prior, we had a similar kind of anti-immigrant sentiment. So it's just this odd pattern that, again, is correlated more than causal, but it is an odd pattern that I picked up in the research.
That is interesting, and it's kind of sometimes where the problem lies. Like, I'm just going to give you an example. I was on an airplane not last night, the night before, and it was a night flight, and I was sitting there, and there was a big family in the back of the plane. Um, And of course, it was a night flight. Everyone was trying to get a little bit of sleep and everything. This family were just big and they were loud and they were like laughing and they were joking around and they were really annoying some of the passengers on the plane. And I kind of was amused to think that this is like a microcosmic scenario that possibly people find in their neighborhoods. It's like how with certain people being so different and such different values and seemingly not caring about the people that are sitting around them, how do we deal with that? How do we and who deals with this?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's both the role of government to some degree, to set kind of general standards for behavior.
Mm,
And it's up to the community writ large. And it's negotiation. Uh, Nothing is I think final in this because we've been doing this as long as we've been in civilization. Like we, if we would have cracked the
yeah.
code on this, we would have done this 5,000 years ago. But we haven't cracked the code on it yet. Humanity requires constant negotiation, constant testing of what works and what doesn't. Um, we know, though, typically what doesn't work and is the extremes. The extremes never really work. Um,
Mm.
so avoiding those should be perhaps the number one goal. Finding middle ground should be the laudable one.
Yeah, I like that. I like that idea. And, don't be afraid to speak and, don't be afraid to offer your opinion. But, you know, respect, yes, it's all very normal human stuff, but so I don't understand a lot of it, why it falls down in so many places.
Well,
Um,
because
you
we
know,
live in a world of absolutes. We have for whatever reason. I think partially driven by social media. Um, Partially driven by the media ecosystem overall. Partially driven by opportune politicians. Is that everyone started treating the world as black and white, and the world is
mm,
not black and white. The world is hyper nuanced, and that requires some challenging thinking for folks. Like you have to be able to hold at times two truths in your head, because what the right says and left says may be good for ginning up responses online or at the polls. But those aren't the way the world works. Absolutes are not the way the world works.
If you're looking to level up your surfing, JWC has got a couple of ways to get you moving forward. I'm running in-person surf coaching sessions here in Portugal with flexible dates. So if you're traveling through or planning a trip, we can lock in a few sessions and work on exactly what your surfing needs. And thanks to our collaboration with SurfRec, the AI robotic filming system now operating in Ribeira de Ilhas and Carcavelos, you can get footage of your sessions. Just send me 5 clips and I break down every detail for you. But even if you're not in Portugal, no problem. You can send me up to 5 waves from anywhere in the world. Surf trip to Indo, comp heats, or your local surf break. Even wave pools. If you got the footage, I'm happy to analyze it. If you want to dive deeper into SurfRec, check out our Podcast Portugal episode 50 with Zé Ferreira. To book surf coaching sessions, to find out more about our immersive surf training camp schedule, online video analysis program, and special JWC rates for using SurfRec, head to justinwestcoaching.com. Direct links in the show notes. Sort of, how does sort of geography play a part as well in the success and because we're talking here, if you were creating like the Portuguese version of the Geography of Prosperity Index, what 5 factors would you measure to determine which Portuguese cities are most likely to thrive?
Well, we
over the
would very
next
much
25
follow the
years?
same rigor that we did in the United States. We look at 5 key dimensions: population renewal, climate resilience, which is both exposure and preparedness for a weather-related event. We look at automation readiness, which is really like workforce preparedness. How well is your local ecosystem and educational system set up to manage technological disruptions to the workplace? We look at governance and foresight. Is your government and institutions thinking about what's coming? And then we measure social cohesion, which is really the glue that holds us all together. And folks are often surprised by how we do that measure, but we look at um, basic things like sidewalks and parks and what people have access to that is shared, because those things always create greater ties amongst the population because they force what we call weak ties. Those hellos, those waves that you mentioned earlier, those little daily interactions have an oversized impact on the well-being of people. Now, you go to the suburbs of Lisbon, for example, closer to the airport, you'll find areas that are likely less socially cohesive. They have less access to public transportation. There's less walkability. There's less access to good park systems. But, in Portugal proper, Lisbon proper rather, I think it would score incredibly high.
That's really nice. I just got this image now when you drive. I don't know if you actually sort of drove a little bit into the rural
Oh,
Portugal,
I
but
did.
you imagine all the guys need is a little bus stop and a bench, and you'll see the whole sort of all the pensioners out there all talking and whiling away the day, just
Yeah,
conversation and laughing.
yeah.
And how beautiful and important that is to the community for them to have somebody to talk
Really
to.
important for people to have a place to gather and really just walk. We are dealing with a global epidemic of loneliness right now.
Mm.
And people say it's all tech, tech's the problem. Tech is part of the problem. The way we've chosen to live, pushing out into sprawl, and this is not just an American problem, although everyone likes to point at us. The suburbanization is not a problem. The sprawl is being overly reliant on cars. You can't interact with somebody else when you're in a car.
Yeah.
If anything, when you're
What
in
do
a
you mean
car,
by
you're
what do
mad.
you mean by?
You're
Yeah,
mad at the
exactly.
drivers around you. But,
Yeah, that's
when you're
true.
walking on a street, you have to negotiate that space because it's shared. It's a very different way of engaging. It's a very different way of engaging with the world.
So how would you argue then? Because if you walk down the street in London, or if you walk down in New York or whatever, and you're negotiating your space, you're not really interacting with people. In fact, you're probably doing the opposite. You put your eyes to the ground because you don't want to
Yeah,
get into
it's
conversation.
in some of that, but what you find in cities like, the hyperdense ones like in New York or London is that you'll often run into people on the street.
Mm,
Um, and these might be family, they might be personal friends, they might be work colleagues. Or, you might be popping into the Pret in London for a sandwich and you strike up a conversation with somebody there who's ordering a coffee. And
yeah,
those create this kind of dynamism that you cannot replicate in a drive-through window at a McDonald's.
yeah.
It does not replicate that way. So
And
it's a dynamism that it is hard to measure in the purest form, but it exists. And that's part of the reason why these cities that are better built function better overall.
yeah, that's very nice. That's very interesting. What are your top cities, do you think? And you've mentioned in Indiana. What do you think your top cities are in terms of the sort of architectural design and these meeting places that you talk about?
Well, I think it goes without saying, New York comes out at number one. Washington, D.C. performs incredibly well on our index in terms of large cities. Seattle, Washington does incredibly well. The metro, or rather the urban area of um, San Francisco and Oakland do well too. But there are plenty of small cities that performed admirably as well that have density but not scale. Cities like Ann Arbor in Michigan, which is home to the University of Michigan, Durham, North Carolina, home to Duke University. These cities did incredibly well in our index and actually really shocked me that they performed so well. But when you visit them, you know exactly why they performed very well. It's impressive to see on the
Mm.
ground.
And what are you seeing there?
You're seeing people on the streets. You're seeing
Okay.
restaurants full. You're seeing a diversity of people of ages and races and backgrounds. You're seeing that more shops than not are operated by local proprietors, not national chains.
Hmm.
You're seeing there is a commitment to building, but one that has rules. In fact, in Durham, North Carolina, one of the key voices in the book is a young man, Zach Prager, who's a developer. He's late 30s now, but he just put up a new tower in downtown Durham. It's quite large. It's an impressive building on the skyline. And he said to me, he goes, "It's not hard to build here in Durham. People say it's hard to build here in Durham, but there are rules. And if you follow the rules, and the rules are intended for the betterment of the community, it is easy to build here." He said this was no problem getting this building up because we followed the rules and we didn't push
Mm.
back on government too hard because the rules were there for a reason and they had been long thought out and debated. So we worked within the rules, not try to change them, as sometimes outside developers do.
Yeah, that's interesting. And not just doing it because you sort of have to tick a box, but actually considering it as the
It went
advantage, you know.
right into the design process from the beginning. This is what we have to do. This is the rule. Let's do it. And it was something like a certain amount of feet setback after a certain amount of feet in height. The building basically has to step back. The tower has to step back. And let me tell you what it does on the street. This building is the dominant building. It's called the Novus Tower. It's the dominant building on the Durham skyline today. When I walked out of my hotel, which is quite literally 2 blocks away from there, I couldn't find it in the skyline because the setbacks were intended that no building would dominate the skyline from the street level. So I had to orient myself just to find this building that was 2 blocks away because I couldn't see it because the design principles that were etched into code for the city were that thoughtful. It was impressive.
Brilliant. Brilliant. Fascinating stuff. Really fascinating stuff. Bradley, I really want to, say a big thank you for your time today. And can you, where can people find more information about your books? And I'm going to leave your Instagram link in the show notes and in the bio, which goes out to all of the podcast platforms. But is there any other links? We
Yeah,
could
you
also
can
put
you can
direct
uh,
links
you
to your
can
book.
find out more about me at bradleyschurman.com. That's SCHURMAN. And if you're interested in getting my newsletter, it's at populationnext.com. That's a Substack newsletter. And of course, all the socials that you already have on Instagram and TikTok.
Brilliant. I'll leave all those in the show notes and in all the sort of Instagram promos that I'm going to do of our episode together. I really appreciate your time, Bradley, and thank you so much. Fascinating stuff.
Thanks, Justin.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Ciao. Did you know that Portuguese bank accounts can sometimes be frozen by the authorities? As someone who's traveled extensively and now runs a business here in Portugal, I value freedom, seamless usability, and bulletproof security. That's why I can't say enough good things about Revolut. With a Revolut account as your backup, you'll still be able to pay bills, receive payments, and keep everything running smoothly, even if you're not in the country. Revolut gives you multi-currency accounts, lets you spend in over 150 currencies at interbank rates, and provides advanced security features like instant card freeze, disposable virtual cards, and safe online shopping. And an app that's as intuitive as it gets. To help support Podcast Portugal, and if you're thinking about setting up a bank account as a backup, click the link in the show notes to sign up for a new Revolut account. It's a win-win situation. You get all the benefits of Revolut, and every time someone signs up, Revolut rewards Podcast Portugal with €40. Revolut, freedom in your pocket. Sign up today and show your support for Podcast Portugal.